always had a fascination for the paranormal, investigating ghost stories and urban legends since I was a kid. If I ever heard a story that included the words, "They say if you go there at midnight," then I was there at midnight, waiting for a genuine encounter. In hindsight, I wish that I hadn't. If you chase a shadow long enough, you're bound to find the caster. Trust me when I say this, you don't want to know. Yeah, I know that's how these stories usually begin. Please don't read this, or I don't care if you believe me. It piques your curiosity. It keeps you reading. Well, I'm warning you now, and I want you to listen carefully. You don't want to know. Keep your thrills vicarious. Stay behind your computer monitor where it's safe. You're better off wondering and guessing, because curiosity without discretion is a dangerous thing. I'm going to tell you how I learnt it the hard way, and I hope it will keep you from meddling too much for your own good. You don't want to find yourself living like me. I'm not even sure I can call it living anymore. I can only hope I can finish this in time, because most of the time I have these days doesn't belong to me. There have been so many myths, tales of gods, demons, spirits and creatures of worlds beyond our own. The old stories change over time, and beliefs change with them. Yet somehow, mankind has always feared and worshipped the same things. Psychologists see it as a need for closure. They say we fear the unknown, and we would accept anything to make sense of the world, even if it means believing in a total fabrication. Everything has a rational explanation, right? We live in a secular age, so that's the assumption. But then again, they also say where there's smoke, there's fire. When I heard and read these stories, I came to question what society told me. Could they all really be the superstitions of ignorant primitives inspired by firelight, paranoia and mind-altering substances? Or were these truly things to be feared even before the songs and legends? That's what I wanted to find out. So, I buried my nose in mythology books and ghost stories, and I kept my ear to the ground for urban legends. I explored them all. Well, all the local ones anyway. I tested everything from the ghost ship of the River Hudson to the infamous Bloody Mary. Every search was a disappointment, but it never discouraged me. It was a great hobby, and I still went through motions just for the thrill. As I'd come to expect, I never exactly struck gold. That is, not until the night of the Blackout at 3rd and Main. It was the night of spring break, after a long and grueling semester. Most of the other students migrated to Manhattan for loud, obnoxious parties. My small group of friends and I, on the other hand, preferred peace and quiet. Apparently, peace and quiet on that particular night meant a trip to a lively Irish pub called Piper's Kilt. Don't ask me what the hell we were thinking. I couldn't tell you. That's where I met a drunken old immigrant by the name of Tom. Tom was a strange man, which made the conversation all the more entertaining, even if we did have to shout over some surprisingly upbeat song about a sinking ship. Over the customary pint of Guinness, I told him about my little hobby, and he told me a story I now wish I'd never heard. He said that Irish tradition runs far deeper than its Catholic years. He told me about the long-held Celtic legends of the Fae. He told me of the Banshee, the Forminian giants, and the leprechauns. To the last one he added,
"Well, have you know, they're not the little people you've been told of, Sonny Jim."
Aside from the conversation, the audience participation folk songs tend to grow on you once you're good and buzzed, and we stayed a lot longer than I expected. After a few more rounds, the night ended just as one would expect, a sobering visit to a terrible diner with terrible coffee. A dear friend also made it a point to get hammered beyond the point of no return, and I had to drive him home so he wouldn't end up parking his car in someone's living room. I slept on the couch with the intent on taking him to pick up his car in the morning, provided he didn't wind up in a coma. I'd been a hypocrite to look down on him, though. He'd done the same for me in the past. Twice. So after helping him up to his bedroom, nearly breaking my back in the process, I retired to the couch. I passed out after 4 episodes of an I Love Lucy marathon and a couple of annoying infomercials. Ordinarily, a hearty helping of alcohol, it wouldn't take me long to find sleep. That, however, was in my own bed. I never slept well in strange places. Plus I still had the spirited racket of the old dun cow running through my head, along with Tom's fascinating stories. I wish those waking hours would have only lasted. They are the last normal memories I have, the last memories I can confidently call my own. A few hours later, well into the hangover that I'd earned, I woke up to a dark house. Every standby light for every electronic device turned black, including the clocks. I peered through the window behind me and lifted one of the blinds and stared out into the street. Every porch light had died at some point in the night, and I couldn't see much of anything. I figured a storm must have rolled overhead and killed the power on the block. I'd slept through louder things on nights like this, after all. I was ready to write it off and go back to sleep, but then I looked at my watch. The second hand ticked just past midnight, and then slowed to a stop. Old Tom's final story came to mind.
The old believers call him the Black Gambler,
He told me.
tempter and trickster of the faith folk. The greedy for wealth and power bartered with him for their souls, called him in the darkest midnight hour, and he came as a dark man at the crossroads.
It could have been a coincidence, sure. Most people probably would have ignored it. I, however, had a tendency to dismiss reason in favour of whimsy. It kind of came with the territory. If ever there was a time to test a myth, I wouldn't have found a better one. Of course, I had no expectations, as usual. I would take 5 minutes of my time to humour the old man, and another 2 or 3 to take a much-needed leak, and then head back to bed. With that plan in mind, I stepped through the front door and into the night. My first thought was that my previous assumption was wrong. I could smell no rainfall, could feel no moisture in the air, and there were no puddles or wet spots. There had been no storm. It didn't stir me, though. Blackouts can have other causes. More concerning, though, was the darkness and the silence. It felt foreboding and wrong, but I just dismissed it like everything else. I was allowing my mind to play tricks on me, that was all. Just letting myself feel the fear I was supposed to feel. And the feeling subsided once I saw the starlight overhead.
This is the meeting place,
he told me.
Crossroads represent choice and consequence, and that's where you'll find him if he hears your call.
So, minding my step in the dark, I approached the nearest intersection to my wasted friend's front porch, and glanced at the street sign as I stood up on the curb. 3rd and Main. I stared at it for a moment before fishing my jacket's pocket for the next step.
If you wish an audience with the Black Gambler, you must dig a shallow hole at your nearest corner. In that hole, bury a small key. That is the ticket to the space between our world and theirs, the space where he can see you, and he may allow you to see him.
Somehow, when I followed Tom's story, I'd imagined an old dirt road in an open field. I'd imagined an old antique key, a heavy thing you might suspect would open a dungeon or an old cellar door. It felt ridiculous to make do with what I had on hand, and I hoped his fey person wouldn't be too particular. Fortunately, I had a selection of useless keys that could have impressed a janitor. I pulled out my keyring and selected a forgotten old thing that probably would have opened a padlock I'd lost. Part of its silver peeled away from the copper base, and I removed a hefty clump of my dear friend's front lawn and placed it beneath, then returned the soil and patted it in. The job wasn't neat, but I doubt he would have cared. He wasn't exactly a proud gardener.
Once that key is in the earth, you've opened the door between our world and theirs. Only mortals with dire purpose venture into the land between, so be careful and be sure. Be sure you're ready, lad, and don't step into the road until you are.
With a deep, sarcastic breath, I assured myself that I was sure, and I took my first step into the road, heading for the centre of the intersection. I stood there waiting, with my acquired cynical streak, for 5 minutes. 5 minutes became 10, 10 became 20, 20 became a week, which became 30 seconds, 2 days, 5 months, an hour, 20 years, an instant, and an eternity. Before I knew what was happening, my sense of time slipped away as I spiralled into a sudden, seemingly endless nightmare. At some moment in that timeless hell, the trance over me subsided, and I became aware of my surroundings again. This was the land between. I had expected it to be a state of mind, some exaggeration of an old druid's meditation. But it was real. That is, if real is an accurate word to describe it. It was unlike any place on earth, unlike anything I've ever felt. It's hard to explain to someone who's never set foot there, but I'll try. At first glance, it looks much the same as it does in our world. It has the same structures, same colours, but you know something isn't right. The world is too still. Like a rigor mortis snapshot of something that should be alive. There's no wind, no breath of life. It's a world not meant for us, and you come into it deaf and numb. You feel no heat or cold against your skin, you don't feel the ground beneath your feet, not even the movements of your own body. It's like an unending tomb, a world of stone where you feel nothing and float aimlessly in complete silence.
Listen for a voice, lad. That's him talking. You'll know it when you hear it. He sees you. That's when your test begins.
Of course, I'd know it when I heard it. It would be the only thing I could possibly hear. Sure enough, I did. It was faint, almost not there at all. But I heard it. Under any other circumstances, I doubt I would have called it a voice. No human lips were forming those syllables, and that deep groan was not the sound from a human vocal cord. Nevertheless, it was speaking to me. I can't tell you what it said, if anything at all. It was just an acknowledgement of some sort, maybe even a greeting. It terrified me.
You will be faced by a great beast, a thing of nightmares, and it'll know you better than you know yourself. You will face it, and you'll face all of your fears, all the things that have ever struck your heart cold, all of the things that have ever haunted your dreams. But don't run. You must not run. To do so will break the right, and to break the right is to insult the gambler. You won't want to insult him, Sonny Jim, I can promise you that.
The thing approached, and I felt its rumbling footsteps beneath my feet. Whatever robbed me of my senses began to return them ever so slowly, or perhaps they returned of their own out of some overpowering instinctive necessity. Whatever the case, I would receive the beast with every primal sense fully alert. It emerged from the darkness down the road, a colossal mountain of fur and muscle towering over the dead street lamps. Its grotesque form veiled in silhouette. It seemed all at once as a giant wildcat, a hulking bull, and a monstrous bear, and it lowered its face less than 2 feet from mine. It growled, and it huffed, its breath like a hot sandstorm stinging my face. And I saw myself in its eyes. I saw myself as it sees me. That's where the true terror begins. Old Tom was right. I did face all of my fears, every one of them. The fear of death, fear of heights, of drowning, fear of losing my job or of dying alone, the fear of accomplishing nothing in my life, and fearing the pressure and responsibility of leadership. The fear of my creepy-ass neighbour from across the hall, the fear of lightning storms in the dark. Even my childhood fears, once funny in hindsight, came crawling back. The fear of seeing my grandmother without her dentures for the first time. The fear of that monster in my closet, the fear of large dogs. The fear of the school bully. And the fear I once felt when I was separated from my mother in a crowded mall.
He'll be watching. If you pass the test, because most don't, he'll take an interest in you. He'll come to you as a man in a dark cloak, and he'll ask you a question, a choice that only you can make.
I didn't run, but it wasn't out of bravery. It was because I was frozen in fear, my legs quaking beneath me, and in genuine tears I hadn't spilled since I was a kid. I no longer needed to take that leap I'd planned for. I stood there for another eternity, failing to catch my breath for much of it. Then, I saw him, standing at the corner, staring at me. He wasn't a man in a dark cloak. He wasn't really a man at all. The tales twist over time through poetic embellishment and mistranslation, so what you hear is never completely truthful. Then again, nothing the storyteller's spin could prepare you for the reality of these things. There are simply no words to describe them. Even I am likely misleading you now, though I'm trying to be as literal as possible. Most cultures have stories about him, and the way most describe is honestly the most accurate. He is a dark man at the crossroads, at all crossroads, and all crossroads belong to him. He didn't move at first. Instead, he spoke to me, and his voice was a soft breeze on the stillness, a wordless whisper. He did offer me a choice, though it wasn't a question. It was simply a curiosity for my will and true desire. If I truly wished for what was to come, my answer came in spite of me, and then my answer was yes. Yes, I would commit a sacrifice for his gift. Yes, a higher purpose mattered more than my life. And yes, I would do what was required of me for these things. He approached me, and I felt a biting chill blow past me as he neared. The closer he came, the less distinct he appeared. His shape wasn't that of a man, but that of a man's shadow suspended in the air, nebulous and immaterial. At brief moments, I could see vague suggestions of a face, but never enough to read his expression. He stood motionless before me for several minutes, and then extended to me one intangible hand.
Present the gambler with a possession of yours, an item of personal importance. He will turn it over in his hands for a time, understanding its meaning to you, and he will return it to you along with a gift.
I had nothing of particular value on me at the time, let alone personal value. I felt through my pockets until I came upon an old Zippo lighter. An old girlfriend passed it to me once she quit smoking. Funny thing was, she picked up the habit again after the stress of the breakup, and she wanted it back. Perhaps for an immature laugh, I decided to hang on to it. That was about the extent of its meaning to me. I didn't love it, but I liked it, and I hoped it would be enough. He did just as old Tom said, and I swear I saw a smile in those vague moments of his face, in those last minutes. He didn't just examine the lighter, he judged my value, because this wasn't really a gift, it was an exchange. And after he was certain of his investment, he returned the lighter to me. He placed the lighter back in my hand, and the moment it touched my skin, the world went black. It was in that last instant of consciousness that I wished I'd taken Tom's final words seriously.
He will turn it to you along with a gift in exchange for 7 years' service. He always collects, so be sure this is what you want, lad. Be sure this is worth it, because your life belongs to him now.
Since then, my life has been one of those hazy nightmares, amnesia, and moments of clarity. I have gone to sleep at night, waking up some days later in a sewer tunnel completely naked, holding mysterious, still warm, bloody masses in my hand. I've blacked out in mid-conversation, waking to see a television news report about a massive fire, and the arsonist fit my description. I have faint memories of places I don't recognise, people I've never met, and even places that shouldn't exist. I have torrential dreams of lands between, standing at my master's side like a pet on a leash. The next time I saw Jack, the friend I drove home that night, was at the doorstep of his family home of his wife and 2 children. He looked well, even fit. When I knew him, he was a sloppy, overweight bachelor, and he had bad luck with women. He also wore a ponytail in those days, and now he was balding. He said he hadn't seen me in years, and everyone assumed I was dead. I begged for his help, but the next thing I knew, I awoke in a dark alley somewhere. I was covered in bruises and cuts, and I was holding Jack's bloodied wallet in my right hand. I don't know how long it's been, but I've had a terrible realization. When it was said that he would demand 7 years of service, it didn't mean 7 years from that night. It meant 7 years in total. I am a slave. I can be spirited away at any moment. Sometimes I'll be fine for months at a time. Sometimes I'll have my life back on track, assuming that the nightmare's over. But he always calls me again. I haven't even had the time to learn what gift he has given me. Like many before me, I am ensnared in his web, and until my debt is fully paid, I am his unwitting puppet. I may never be free. This is the last time I will say it. Stay behind your computer monitor where it's safe. You don't want to know. It's just not worth it. Convince yourself that these things aren't true and keep your curiosity in check. Force yourself to lose interest and find a new hobby. if you can. If not for your sake, then for mine. I've already found the blood of too many meddlers on my hands as it is.